What do you think about Greta Thunberg? I think she's a lunatic. I think she's a lunatic. I think that she is a little Nazi. I think Greta Thunberg is a little Scandinavian Nazi. That's what I think about her. She's the type of person who will say, we must do population control. And if you disagree with me, how dare you? How dare you disagree with my desire for genocide to bring the population down? How dare you? She needs to be in a psych ward. She doesn't need to be giving speeches. She doesn't need to be, but the thing is that the world has gone insane. I hate to say it, but the world has gone mad. And more, I don't want to say every year, because there's always these little subtle changes that most of us miss. But these subtle changes eventually culminate into major changes that are seen in a span of 5 to 10 years, I'll say. So I will say every 5 years you begin to see a significant change in culture. And then every 10 years you see extreme changes in culture. So like 2015, the Congress of the United States approved of the Republic of Sodom. That was a huge change. And then 2020 comes along and it's like, boom. You see, but even before that, 2018, you went to stores, you begin to see the flag of the Republic. You went to Target, you begin to see the flag of the Republic. And so you begin to see major shifts in society. The world that we live in is mad. It's just crazy. You have a massacre that took place, the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And people are screaming, oh my God, look at the bombing of Gaza. There has been more attention given to the bombing of Gaza than to the massacre of the Jews. I don't give a shit what anyone says, that's the truth. Every time I go to the news, it's Gaza, 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 Gaza. Gaza, 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 Gaza. Well, and they'll say, well, the reason why we're talking about it more is because it's happening right now. Oh, I see. So when the bombing ends, you're going to stop talking about it? Or are you going to keep complaining about it? And should we stop talking about it when the bombing stops? Should we stop talking about it? So in their words, if Israel did a one-day bombing that killed 1,300 Gazans and then stopped, you wouldn't be talking about it. It has to be something that's prolonged for you to talk about it. It can't just be a one-day horror for you to talk about it. It's insanity. It's just insanity. And then they'll say, well, we understand why the massacres happen. And you're seeing all of this justification for murder. You're seeing people using equivocation for murder. The world is going mad. The world is going mad. And not everything, and here's another thing that I want to tell you guys. Not everyone who is anti-Muslim, I don't want to say anti-Muslim. Not everyone who is anti-Islam is necessarily a good guy. That's another thing that I want to warn you guys about. Because we have this massacre that took place, and there's a lot of talk about Hamas and all this stuff. And now you have people who were part of the counter-jihad movement back in the day kind of gaining their popularity again, or they're regaining some of their past popularity again. And so people say, oh, look, Douglas Murray, and you have Musab Hassan Youssef and a bunch of these other guys, oh, they're so great, blah, blah, blah. Just because someone is anti-Islam or anti-Hamas does not necessarily make them good guys. We have to be balanced in our view, everybody. They are people who use Islamic terrorism to justify other evils. We've seen this many times. They will use the the danger of terrorism to justify eugenics and Darwinism and all these dangerous things. And that is the problem. And the reason why it is like this, the reason why you have these massive movements that gain so much popularity because they're anti-Islam, only for these very movements to support some kind of Nazi ideology or some kind of racism or something crazy, is because we live in a very mad society. We cannot have balance. You cannot have balance in a society that is mad. You can only have extremes. And that is so dangerous. You cannot have balance in a society that has gone mad. You can only have extremes. You can only have extremes. So you have Islam and you have these Muslims, and they're extreme and they're fanatic and they're autistic, religiously autistic, and they're lunatics and they are out for blood. And then you have the response. And the response comes out, and the response seems logical. Like, these terrorists are bad and Muslims are bad. And then you're like, yeah, okay, I can see where you're coming from. But then they'll say, Islam is against Sodom. We have to be for Sodom. They'll say, a lot of these Muslims are non-white. Let's scream out for white power. Or some kind of eugenist stuff. And they'll whistle blow for that sort of thing. And that's always the danger. And that danger is always there because we live in a mad society, everyone. For example, during the Lebanese Civil War, you had the PLO. PLO was the biggest terrorist organization in the world. And the PLO did massacres. The PLO did acts of terrorism in much of the world. And they started... They started a civil war in Lebanon. And they tried to take over all of Lebanon. And in the conclusion of that war, there was a peace treaty that was signed between the PLO and the Falangists. And the Falangists were an ally of Israel. They were a proxy of the Israelis. And what eventually happened was there was an agreement that was signed between the PLO and the Falangists. And part of the agreement was that the PLO would leave the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila, and the PLO left the refugee camps, and the people were without defense, and the Maronite Catholic Nazis, who were proud about their so-called Phoenician race, went into the camps and proceeded to spend the next 3 days butchering 3,500 people. That was a response, supposedly. At least it was masqueraded as one. At least it was seen as a response. But it was evil. So the response is not always a good thing. We can acknowledge the problem of Islam. We can talk about the problem of Islam. But not every response is good. Not every response is good. In fact, I will say that it is the people that you agree with the most who you should be most suspicious of. You should be more suspicious of people that you agree with than people who you disagree with. Someone you disagree with, you know that you disagree with them. You're never going to collaborate with them. You're never going to be in cahoots with them. You're done, right? But someone that you agree with the most, someone who you either fully agree with or to the most part agree with, is going to be more destructive. Not necessarily more destructive. Is going to be more dangerous, or is going to have more of a potential danger than someone who you greatly or fully disagree with. So the person who says Muslims are bad and Islam is bad, and all, you're like, oh, I agree. But don't just take that as the only gauge by which to measure someone. The gauge by which to measure someone is much wider than just whether or not he's against Islam or for Islam. You know, there were Serbs who were against Muslims in the Balkans, and they committed some pretty atrocious things. So just because, and the Maronites, the Phalangists of Lebanon who committed this horrific massacre in Sabra and Shatila in the 1980s, these were not Muslims. These were Catholics. These were Lebanese Catholics. The Middle Eastern Christian world is a lot different than the Christian world of America or the Western world. The Christianity of the Middle Eastern world is not necessarily, oh yes, we love Jesus and we drink Starbucks every Sunday. A lot of the Christianity in the Middle East is horrendously tribal, horrendously racialist and tribalistic. For example, and I've told this story before, I remember going to a Maronite church, and it was for a youth meeting, and how old was I at the time? I was 22 or 23 years old at the time, and I went to this Maronite church, and I was hanging out with the people there, and everything seemed okay, and then the bishop came over. His name is Bishop Abdullah Elias. You can look him up. And he came and sat next to me, and we started talking, and then all of a sudden, another Lebanese priest comes over and sits next to us, and then another Lebanese priest comes over and sits next to us, and we began to talk. And I said, and they asked me, one of them asks me, "Where are you from?" He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from California." And then the same guy or a different guy, I don't remember. One of the priests then tells me, "No, tell us where you're really from." It's like, oh, well, my father is Palestinian. Ooh. Palestinian. So they know who's Lebanese, who's Palestinian just by looking at them. And they will passive-aggressively harass you. And I remember in a different instance, I went to a different church. It was an Anglican church, and I wasn't there because I was an Anglican. I was there because somebody asked me to give a little talk about the Syrian civil war to a class. So I said, sure. So I went to this Anglican church, and I started talking about the Syrian civil war, and I started talking about how the NATO-backed rebels are not the good guys. These people are absolutely destructive. And they kill Christians, and they've been murdering Christians in Syria. And I've talked about how the Syrian Christians have been persecuted and slaughtered and all this stuff. And this was before ISIS. This was back in 2000 and... oh, man, this had to have been back in 2011, 2012, right in the beginning of the Syrian civil war. I was talking about it. And here I was, giving a lecture on the Syrian civil war and all this stuff, the FSA and how they were terrorists and all this stuff. And these two Lebanese guys got up, and one of them starts yelling at me, raising his voice at me in front of everybody in the room. "Oh, the Syrians! You don't know what you're talking about! Syria! The Bashar al-Assad is a tyrant! He's a tyrant!" He's screaming and screaming, and I'm like, man, calm down. And he's yelling. No matter how much I try to talk to this guy, he kept raising his voice at me. And I said, "They're killing Christians over there. Don't you know that?" And he said, "Those Christians in Syria, like, fuck them. Who cares?" And I saw this bigotry that was there. There's this tribalism and there's this bigotry that's there. And Middle Eastern Christianity is not the same as Christianity in America or Christianity in Britain or Christianity in Canada. Christianity in the Middle East is not like in America where it's like, we love the Lord, we're going to go have some Starbucks, and then we're going to have a Bible study, and then we're going to have some sushi with some wasabi, and it's going to be great. That's not how it is. I remember hearing American Christians talk about, the Christians in the Middle East. Oh, those Middle Eastern Christians, they love Jesus, they love the Lord. And yes, there are a lot of good Middle Eastern Christians out there, don't get me wrong. But the way that American evangelicals were talking about it was kind of cringe. It was kind of like they were projecting their own culture of Christianity on Middle Eastern Christians. And they were the way that they were describing them, it was almost like they were describing them as if they were American Christians, like they were going to Bible studies and the Muslims were there to get them and all this stuff. And yeah, there was horrific persecution that was going on. I'm not denying it. It was horrific what was going on. My whole point is that American Christianity and Middle Eastern Christianity are two different worlds. Middle Eastern Christianity is very tribal. And people who go to church in the Middle East or who are born into Christianity in the Middle East are not necessarily like amazing Christians. They're not necessarily like, oh, Christians who read the Bible. And a lot of them are just people who are Christian by ethnicity. I am Assyrian, therefore I am Christian. I am Lebanese, therefore I am a Maronite. Or I am Maronite, therefore I am Catholic. I am a Iraqi Christian, therefore I am a Catholic, or therefore I am Eastern Orthodox. This is pretty much what it comes down to. It's not like they're reading the Bible all the time, they're interested in the Bible. Those people don't know, most of those people don't know anything about they know about Christianity, don't get me wrong, but a lot of those people don't even care about the Bible. Palestinian Christians, for the most part, don't care about the Bible. They don't care about the Bible. To give you guys an example, I remember I got into a discussion with a Maronite priest, and he was telling me that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. And I said, no, they don't. They don't worship the same God. They don't worship the same God. One worships a Unitarian God. The other worships the Trinitarian God. They're not the same. And he said, no, they're the same. They worship one God. They worship the same God. They worship the same God. And I said to him, no, Islam is an Arab continuation of the Arian heresy. He goes, what is Arianism? This is a priest, Maronite Lebanese priest. He says, what is Arianism? What is Arianism? I said, 4th century heresy that was founded by Arius, who was condemned in the Council of Nicaea. And he said, he looks at me and he said, I fell asleep in church history class. And walks away. Just like that. These people are crazy. And so when you hear stories about how the Lebanese Catholics fought the Palestinians, that has nothing to do with Christianity. That had nothing to do with Christianity. It was all about ethnicity. It was all about territory. And if they were really all about fighting the Muslims, then why in the hell did they side with the Shiites? They sided with the Shiites. And to this day, you have Maronite priests honoring the self-mutilation ritual in Shia Islam. And I did a video about this 2 years ago, and a bunch of Lebanese came over in my comment section and said, you're a liar, you're a liar. And for those of you who don't know, the Shiite Muslims have this ritual where they cut themselves in remembrance for Ali. And you have Maronite priests who go to these events and they honor the ritual. They speak nice about the ritual, as if it's part of Christianity. And there were people saying that I was a liar. So I did a follow-up video showing them all the evidence. All of the evidence showing the quotes from Maronite priests from today. Talking about the greatness of this ritual, self-mutilation ritual, where they cut themselves. They do self-flagellation and self-mutilation for Ali. And everybody shut their mouths. So it's not about fighting Islam. Like, a lot of these people don't care about fighting Islam. They just care about, keeping their own positions. There's a lot of bullshit, guys, out there. There's a lot of nonsense out there. And I went to the Maronite church. And the reason why I went to the Maronite church is because there's not all that. I didn't see any. I didn't see a lot of citizens for the Democratic Republic of Sodom there. That's the only reason why I went to the Maronite church. And I went because I was going to the Latin church, and I kept getting harassed by these ambassadors for the Democratic Republic of Sodom. So I said, I'm going to go to the Middle East. So I went to the Lebanese church. And do you know what I found over there? I didn't find sexual predators in the Lebanese church, but I sure as hell found racist. And that woke me up, and I started reading up on Sabra and Shatila, and I found out all about it. My father told me years ago about Sabra and Shatila. He told me years ago about Sabra and Shatila. But I didn't think that these people in America were the same types of people that were in Lebanon in the 80s. And boy, was I wrong.